Mr. Foreman, it is such an honor to get to meet you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. The one thing I haven't had done in my life is a comic book.
There's
Next,
still
next.
time. We can still do it. Now, when they came to you about adapting your life to the big screen, did you let them know you could put a hurt on them if they messed it up?
It was strange because I watched the script and everybody was interested in writing a good script, and I had a lot of input. And so I told them, I said, you know what? Since it's my movie, right? Yeah. Can I win the Rumble in the Jungle this time? The Hollywood wouldn't go for that.
That's too bad. That's too bad. Now that the movie is finished, I was curious, was there anything from your life that didn't make the final cut that you wish had made it into the film?
There are a lot of things they cut out. They just couldn't put in. But not in hindsight, I realized there were a lot of things I wish I had cut out of my own life. It wasn't like it's been a happy ever after thing. I've had to fight so much and make it brief. The good thing, they told a good story, art. In one scene, you could see 25 different things just because of art. And so I'm happy about how the movie came out.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting. I told George, the director, that I could have watched another hour of this movie. I loved it so much. Now, I've heard you say that you think Joe Louis was the hardest puncher of all time, but who had the hardest face?
The hardest.
The hardest face. Who had the
Oh,
who could take a punch the best?
you know what? I fought Muhammad Ali, and it was a shock to me because I thought I was going to go out and knock him out in 2 rounds, 3 rounds at the most. I looked around, it was 6, 7 rounds. He hadn't gone. I hit him with some hard shots, but he was determined to stay on his feet. Never seen a man with that much willpower. He stayed the course. Beat me too.
Well, not if you would have had your way about it with this movie.
Yeah.
Now, I was to this day, I still have a George Foreman grill in my kitchen. I love that grill. I've bought 3 or 4 of them, since the late '90s. Hulk Hogan has famously said for years that he was almost the original pitchman for the grill, and I was just curious if you've ever spoke to Hulk about that.
Oh, Hulk Hogan and I were great friends. We traveled, even got in the ring with Hulk Hogan. He's a great friend of mine. But the George Foreman grill has got his own story. I guess we all have side stories, but that George Foreman grill has played a great part in my life. Kids are going to college, use it in the dormitories. It's got its own life. No one can claim it. It's not even mine anymore. It's theirs.
Yeah. Well, I got one more question for you, and thank you very much for your time. Now that you don't have to train like a boxer anymore, what's something from training that you're thrilled you never have to do ever again?
Boy, get in that ring every day and spar. You bring young guys in the ring. I came back into boxing. I was over 40 years old. And there weren't any 40-year-old boxers around, just kids trying to knock my head off. And that was the hardest part of it, getting in the ring again, sparring with those young kids. Boy,
Yeah.
they had a party on my head.
I thought your answer was going to be squatting cattle, but that's no problem.
I'm still dealing with the cattle on the ranch in Marshall, Texas.
That's amazing. Mr. Foreman, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. This was truly an honor for me. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks back at you.
Now, this isn't your first time playing a boxing trainer. I loved you as Tick in Southpaw. Yeah, how did the experience of playing a fictional boxing trainer compare with playing a real one?
You do research a little differently because you're really specific about the person and stuff. In a real life character, you have to look at the way they speak, the way they move, what their motivations were, and trying to be true to that. But when you project the character, you do all that work in the imagination side, with a not real character. So in the end, you still kind of build the same sort of pyramid of like thoughts for the character, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's interesting. Now, growing up, do you recall watching any of George Foreman's matches? And if so, which one was your favorite fight?
I remember the rope dope, I remember that fight. I
Yeah.
remember watching it and seeing it, everybody talking about it. I was watching as many fights as we could. There was very few stations, and you sat in your living room and with your family and watched the fight.
Mhm.
That was a big deal. You know, Ali, Foreman, Frazier, those guys, those giants.
Yeah. I remember going back and I went back and watched Rumble in the Jungle, but I wasn't alive when that went down. But I the only Foreman fight I remember watching live was against Holyfield. I think I was
Oh
about
yeah.
yeah, I was like 8 or 9 when that fight happened. So and I my dad ordered it on pay-per-view and everything. I remember watching that one. Um, I have to tell you that Bloodsport is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love you in
Okay.
that movie. It's I just want to know, were you ever surprised by that film's like massive influence on MMA and fighting games, and it's developed such a cult following?
It did because it's like was like the first time you saw different styles all fighting each other. That's not the first time. I think in Enter the Dragon, you got to see like Bruce fight different styles, which is unique. But Bloodsport like had like monkey styles, all different styles, you know, fighting. And I think that's what really like gets people is like watching all those different the Thai boxer,
Yeah,
you know,
there's the sumo guys in there.
yeah. And and Chinese Hercules, that's what he was called. And I
Yeah.
forget his real name, Sam something. He was in it. He was sort of the villain in the show.
Mm-hmm. Now I forgive me, I work with ComicBook.com, but I have to ask you one nerdy question. I know Andor season 2 is around the corner, and I don't want any spoilers, but is it safe to say the Star Wars fans have not seen the last of Saw Gerrera?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's safe to say that.
Fantastic. Forrest, this was such an honor for me. I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much. And I love the movie. I really appreciate it. Hi, Chris.
What's up,
Man,
Chris?
you did an incredible job as George
Thank
Foreman
you.
did. I really loved your performance. Now, I can only imagine how much responsibility there is to playing a real life person, but how much extra pressure is there when the man you're playing is still alive and can knock you out?
It's a lot of pressure, and make no mistake, Mr. Foreman can still knock you out. You know, it's a lot of pressure, but I felt a big responsibility because I felt like this was a story that needed to be told because Mr. Foreman's story had just been bypassed for so long, and when I read his autobiographies and I looked at all the footage that I could find on Mr. Foreman, I thought it was miraculous that this
Yeah.
individual had such an incredible and impressive life.
Right. And you play George, over like a 25-year period, and which is fantastic. And I've always felt like there's angry Old Testament George, and then there's sort of like benevolent New Testament George. So which version of George was your favorite to play?
Um, I think that for me, what was my favorite thing to try to play was the benevolence throughout the entire story, right?
Mhm.
That he was always somebody who had joy. He was always somebody who loved his friends and his family, who was giving, who cared about people, who loved having a good time, who smiled a lot, right? That's not something that just happened in the second half of his life, that was always who he was, but the given circumstances were what created the jadedness or the anger or the
Right.
rage.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great way to put it, actually. And now that you say that, I sort of realized that that's what you were doing. Now, I was impressed with how well you were able to physically move and throw punches the way that George Foreman did. How long did it take to learn how to mimic George's very specific boxing style?
It's hard to say. I mean, I was working on it all the time. I mean, we would work out in the gym and train for 5 to 6 hours, and I'd go home and I would still be doing the footwork. I'd still be watching tape. There were days where I would go in on the weekends and no one's in the gym, and I'd go into the ring and I would practice. I would shadow box. I would do his movements. So it's hard to say how long it took because I was always working on it to the last moment. I never stopped.
Now, how closely did you actually get to work with George when it came to your performance? And did he have any critiques or suggestions?
Uh, no critiques or suggestions, but I think that spending time with him in Houston and the amount of tape that we had on him was more than enough.
Mhm.
I think it was more than enough. So for me, it was just okay. What are the important things that I want to highlight about his character, who he is, and what are the things that are super specific to those who know and love him on a personal level, and also those of us who just know him as a celebrity figure, and I wanted to get those types of things right.
Well, I think you did a fantastic job personally, and I want to thank you for your time. I really appreciate it, and I really enjoyed the movie. So thank you very much, Chris.
Thanks, Chris, man. Take care.
I can only imagine how much pressure it must be to adapt a film about someone's real life. But how much worse is that pressure when that person is still alive and has the power to knock you out?
Well, definitely when I first started the film, and that's the first thing I said, oh, this is going to be tough, man. He's right here, And then on top of that, he's iconic and you love him. You love his work. You love his boxing. You love the things he represent. But it all changed when I went to his house, man, in Houston. We sat for 4 hours and then he offered me barbecue. It's like, wow, he's just like me. And gave me the respect to tell the story, and gave me carte blanche to tell the story I wanted to tell. But the key was great. I can make a phone call and say, hey, what were you thinking in this moment? What were you thinking there? And that's so great to have that.
Now, this isn't the first biopic you've directed, as you also made Notorious, which I love. Were there any lessons that you learned from making Notorious that you were able to utilize in this film?
Yeah, I think with Notorious, man, with this film, it was really great, which is try to get through telling the story as fast as I can in the editing room. You know what I mean? I was very delicate and took my time there. Here's like, let's keep trying. Let's keep working it. Do we need this fight? Take this fight out. Do we need this moment? Do we need to be longer here? And it's just more viewings, more time to edit quickly, to view more. Because we're covering so much. We covered most that I ever covered in the film from 1960 to 1994. So you want to make sure you spend in the right time in the right places. And that's where I spent most time in the editing room to look at that.
Yeah, I felt like the film really flew by. And I love the way you incorporated the real life footage of the Holyfield fight. I thought that was very smart. What went into the decision behind that being the fight to utilize real footage?
Yeah, at that time, I felt like as a filmmaker, we spent so much time to get those fights right, the early part. Even the 5 fights when George fight 5 fighters, that actually happened. Real true story. While Ali is doing the commentary. We spent time with that. And I felt like at that time, Holyfield, I just felt like let's take it from Mary Jones' point of view, because it was from her vision. Her vision at that point, which is real life. She said she dreamed that George was going to win a heavyweight championship belt. So she's looking at that, and on television, I stayed in her point of view, and it didn't happen. You know what I mean? So those are the things that I felt like was the right time to break away. And we never really see that often. In most boxing movies, we do some things in the boxing genre that we try to go left when everybody goes straight.
Now, you did mention earlier about in the editing process how you were like, do we need this fight? Do we need this? And I know you're covering so much for a 2-hour span. What were there any fights or moments from George's life that you had to cut? Which one was the hardest to cut, I guess is what I'm asking. Like, which one were you like, I don't want to let this go, but I feel like it's best for the pacing of the film?
Yeah, I think one of the thing was the pacing was the Joe Frazier was, he knocked him out 6 times. And in the film, we just trimmed it down a little bit. But I shot most of all the 6. And I just felt like I didn't really need all of them. We get the idea. That's just pacing, getting to the rest of the story. Because George is eventually, midpoint, is going to quit boxing. He thought he was done till money was lost and he had to go back. So those are some of the choices. You want to stick into those best shots. And we did real boxing. Guys are really hitting each other. There's none of that stunt. We're really hitting each other. So you want to show it all, but you got to realize I got a whole story to tell.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me. That's my time, but I really enjoyed the movie and I appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.